After 2 big expansion pack updates in a row, Nintendo is back to supporting the regular old Nintendo Switch Online with 4 titles for the Game Boy. This is an absolutely packed update with games as diverse as Kirby's Star Stacker, The Sword of Hope, Survival Kids, and the shoot-'em-up classic Gradius, the Interstellar Assault. Yeah, that's pretty cool news, but are any of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, Nintendo Power, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Prepare yourself for some whiplash, everybody, because this is going to be a very eclectic episode of Nintendo Classics Review Crew.
Kirby がアクションパズルゲームに初登場。どんどん星を集めよう。カービィのキラキラキッズゲームボーイポケットでね。
Here we have yet another reminder that when Nintendo wants to sell you a puzzle game, what they'll do is they'll turn to their stable of popular characters. In this case, it's Kirby, who is just coming off a star in a much more popular puzzler, Kirby's Avalanche. Although Kirby Star Stacker was originally released for both the Game Boy and the Super Famicom, we only got the handheld version here in America. Now, we covered the 16-bit version when it hit the Nintendo Switch Online back in 2023, so let's see what the critics said about this handheld version. Despite coming out for the Game Boy in 1997, Nintendo Power was the one and only English-language magazine that decided to review Kirby's Star Stacker. Giving it a 3.2 out of 5, they liked that it seemed simple, but is very challenging and fun. They were also impressed by the 4 different modes. That said, they didn't like that the higher difficulty levels are truly demented, and complained that Kirby is just a figurehead. Look, it just goes to show that when even Nintendo's own magazine is complaining about how the company shoves mascot characters into their puzzle games, you know there's a problem. Now here's a fun surprise. Coming from the same publisher and developer that gave us point-and-click classics like Shadowgate and Deja Vu, The Sword of Hope was one of the Game Boy's earliest and best role-playing games. Released in 1991, this fantasy-adventure game took the elements that people loved about the classic NES games and mixed it with a fair helping of turn-based combat, all while weaving in an intriguing story about a mad king who's been corrupted by an evil dragon. Now that's a setup with a lot of promise. What could go wrong? Well, it's certainly considered a cult classic these days. The Sword of Hope was almost entirely ignored by the game critics back in 1991. Honestly, I blame the release date, which saw it hit retailers right between the debut of Sonic the Hedgehog and the launch of the Super Nintendo. I mean, come on, it just didn't stand a chance to be noticed by EGM or GamePro. As a result, the only English-language review comes to us from Nintendo Power, who gave this monochromatic RPG a 4 out of 5. But don't get too excited, because this is a time before Nintendo Power gave anything resembling an in-depth review. About the closest we get is this unhelpful blurb. Hope comes to Riccar. Most of the citizens of Riccar were transformed into trees by the forces that commanded the kingdom. But one brave knight escaped this fate and saved the king's son from certain death. Now the son, Prince Theo, has grown to manhood, and it's up to him to free the kingdom. Thus, a new role-playing adventure from Kemco Seika begins. Yeah, like I said, Nintendo Power didn't exactly give out traditional reviews at that time. Pretty much the only reason we're even counting this as a review is because they assigned a score, and a pretty good one at that. The Sword of Hope is definitely worth playing, even if it was completely ignored by the critics at the time.
So if you want to play with power, let the games begin. There's a lot of games here. A lot. I got kicks, man. Kicks. This is the game. This is the game. Game Boy's gigging. It's Tetris. Batteries and Tetris included. Amazing. Hey, Game Boy! Nintendo word.
Long before Clay Entertainment begged you not to starve, Konami decided to strand a bunch of kids on a tropical island and just hope for the best. Survival Kids is about as close as you're gonna get to Lord of the Flies on the Game Boy, giving players an open-ended adventure where they need to track down food, craft tools, and find a good place to sleep, all in the hopes of, surviving another day or two. With a new Survival Kids game coming to the Switch 2 in June, it's a lot of fun going back to the original all these years later. Unfortunately, most critics completely ignored Survival Kids when it first came out in 1999. I don't know, perhaps they assumed that it wouldn't appeal to their core audience, or maybe they were just over-covering Game Boy. But whatever it was, only 2 English-language magazines decided to cover this cult classic. Of the 2, Nintendo Power gave it the lower score, a 7.6 out of 10. Kyle called it an original concept that has been executed well, while Jason agreed with my literary comparison. Lord of the Flies has never been so fun and cute. A likable primer and adventure RPGs. Well, that's a solid enough score. Computer and video games was completely won over by the concept and the charm. Believe it or not, they gave Survival Kids a perfect 5 out of 5, summing it up this way. It's like a Tamagotchi, but one you really care for. The kid roams around in a top-down Zelda-style world, and without all the messy stats that make RPGs dull. It's totally original and totally great. Buy it. Now, despite being criminally ignored back in the day, Survival Kids is a game you absolutely need to play. It's a great fit on the Switch, and it's coming out right in time to get you in the mood for the upcoming sequel. Seven years after Gradius first hit arcades, the Konami shoot-'em-up was still flying high. It was widely considered to be one of the top shooters on the Nintendo Entertainment System, was a mainstay on the MSX, and had even just come out for the Super Nintendo. Released in early 1992, Gradius, the Interstellar Assault, is the franchise's second foray onto the Game Boy, with Nemesis coming out just 20 months earlier. It retained pretty much everything that people loved about the classic shooter, including Konami's unique power-up system, which featured all of the upgrades that you could possibly want. With only a handful of shoot-'em-ups on the Game Boy, let's go ahead and see what the critics thought of Gradius. For the first time this episode, I'm finally able to start with my usual go-to, Electronic Gaming Monthly. Reviewed in their 32nd issue, this is one of those times when the 7 out of 10 average doesn't quite tell the full story. With scores ranging from 5 all the way up to 8, there was a big disagreement at EGM. Sushi X didn't seem all that impressed. Gradius for Game Boy. Oh boy. It's a decent game, but the blurring ruined some of the gameplay. As a matter of fact, in certain areas, you may as well not even guide your ship, as it becomes nearly invisible amidst the chaos. Take your chances with something less volatile, like Missile Command. Ed disagreed, giving it an 8 and arguing that fast action shooters are hard to do on the slow-moving Game Boy screen. While Konami has done everything possible to minimize this problem, blurring does pop up once in a while. Still, the game does play well and all the fun and challenges there. I like it as it is, and think you will too. The action is fast and furious. While Nintendo Power did go a little bit lower, giving it a 3.4 out of 5, their so-called review isn't even worth quoting here. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to check in with EGM's sister magazine, Super Gaming, which covered import games and only lasted 4 issues. Ken complained that black and white really doesn't do justice to the shooter. Nemesis 2 really needs blasting color to come off brilliant and spectacular. Still, if you're a Game Boy junkie, you'll like it. Very few games look good on the Game Boy, except maybe a few puzzle titles. Samurai liked it a little bit more than that, concluding that this is about as good as a Game Boy shooter can be. The graphics are very intense as far as black and white go. The music and sound are great and the stereo effects are very cool. The power-ups and end bosses are what make this game. Throw in a couple of intermission screens and you have a great cart. Super Gaming gave Gradius an average score of 7 out of 10. Now, moving up the scale, we see N-Force go a little bit higher with a respectable 83%. However, the highest score comes from GamePro, who gave the Game Boy shooter a surprising 5 out of 5. Fans of the series are gonna love this big handheld space shooter. 2 megs! It features the best elements of the Gradius series, including the latest weaponry system found in Gradius 3. On the downside, your eyesight's gonna suffer. The Vic Viper had to get mighty small to fit on your Game Boy screen, and it's sometimes tough to know what's coming at you. Combine this with some of the toughest Gradius levels yet, and this cart's a tough challenge. But heck, Konami proved once again that good things come in small packages. Whether the critics gave it a 6 or a perfect score, everybody seems to agree that the action is compromised being on the Game Boy hardware. Will this be a big deal on the Switch? Probably not, but there's definitely more shoot-'em-up competition there, including of course the original NES version of Gradius, as well as Genesis shooter classics like Zero Wing and Musha. Gradius, the Interstellar Assault, is definitely still worth playing, but, temper your expectations a little bit.
あのグラディウスがファミコンソフトになった。未知との戦いは今始まった。全宇宙を飲み込んだ超スペースファイターグラディウス絶賛発売中。Konami.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist that looks at literally every single game on the Nintendo Classics app. Every single one of them. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Game Boy game? I suppose it could be from the Game Boy Color, but not the Game Boy Advance. It's a whole other system. I'm just talking about the original Game Boy here. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back next week with more Nintendo Switch Online countdowns, including one that was going to go live today. Look for that on Monday. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.